Welcome to Ryan's Running Reviews in partnership with Roadrunner Sports, and today we're going to compare the Nike Structure 25 to the Infinity Run 4. Let's run with it. Before we get started, I do want to say that these shoes were provided to me by Roadrunner Sports. However, no one had a chance to preview this video, and this file synopsis is my own. I'd also like to say please leave a like on the video and consider subscribing. Here we go. Some of you are probably wondering why I'm comparing these two shoes because they're technically, I guess, in different categories, but in my mind, it makes sense, so let me break it down. The Structure 25 is Nike's Stability Workhorse Daily Trainer, while the Infinity Run 4 is their Max Cushion Workhorse Daily Trainer. However, they both have a lot of similarities with stability elements built into them, and honestly, even though the Structure is classified as a stability shoe, I kind of consider it like a light stability shoe, and even though the Infinity Run 4 is a Max Cushion Neutral Daily Trainer, I kind of consider it a light stability shoe as well, and I'll explain why I think that further on in the review, because the midsoles have some kind of overlapping elements to them, even though the foams are completely different. I also want to point out that Nike sent me a size 14 Infinity. They do recommend going up half a size, and I don't know if they make a 13.5, so that's why I got a size 14 compared to what they sent me for the Structure, which is my typical size 13. So keep that in mind when you see the two comparisons, but because they do recommend going up half a size, I think it makes for a decent comparison here. So who are these two shoes for? Well, they're both highly cushioned workhorse trainers that I think give you some additional support on the medial side. So whether you're on your feet all day or you want that one shoe to last a ton of miles and give you just a bit of guidance, I think that's where these come in, at least within the Nike lineup. Both shoes do have a wide version available, so if you have a higher volume foot, I do recommend bumping it up to that. And as far as price goes, the Structure comes in at $140, while the Infinity comes in at $160, so $20 more compared to its counterpart here. As far as weight goes, both of these shoes lean toward the heavier side of things, and for a men's size 9, the Structure weighs 10.8 ounces, while the Infinity weighs 11.1 ounces. Now, this doesn't tell the full story, as Nike themselves recommends you go up at least half a size, which I do recommend, meaning you're going to have an even heavier shoe compared to what's on paper, if that makes sense. So you're looking at probably half an ounce, maybe more, additional weight with Infinity compared to the Structure if you want to get a proper fit. The sack heights are pretty similar. In the Structure, you have 37-27 for a 10mm drop, while the Infinity is 39 and 30 for a 9mm drop. So they're within striking distance of each other, even though the Infinity weighs a good bit more. Moving on to the midsoles, I'll give you a quick rundown to kind of explain my thoughts on each. The Infinity has full-length React X foam, which is a more sustainable version of React. It's also slightly bouncier and slightly more energetic compared to prior versions as well. There's no air units, no plate, no nothing, just pure React X foam. On the Structure, we have full-length Hushon foam, slightly softer compared to prior years. They also added air units directly under your forefoot. I do think both of these should be classified as a light stability shoe, and I'll explain starting with the Infinity. If we take a look at the midsole, it's sculpted in such a way that it gives you easier compression on the lateral side compared to the medial side. So when we take a look on the lateral side, you notice you have this kind of concave sculpting. It's this kind of cutout that runs down the length of the midsole, while on the medial side, it's much more filled in and substantial. Now, what does this do? Well, like I talked about before, it has easier compression outwards compared to inwards, which gives you some pronation support, which technically on a neutral shoe, the midsole should be rather consistent, and that's not really the case here. You also have an incredibly wide outsole giving you some inherent stability. So when you combine those two things together, you have a light stability shoe, at least in my mind. The Structure 25 on the other foot is classified as a stability shoe, but is rather consistent in the midsole and doesn't have any super intrusive stability mechanisms. The only other element to the midsole here is the air zoom unit in the forefoot, and then the rest of that stability experience is really kind of provided by the sculpting of that Hushon 3.0 foam. If we flip it around to the medial side, you'll notice you have that wall of foam right underneath your arch, which does give you a more noticeable arch sensation compared to the Infinity. And you also have that similar sculpting where the medial side is a bit more filled in compared to the lateral side, where you have that kind of concave cutout, again, giving you easier compression on the lateral side compared to the medial side, helping with overpronation. I'll also say they added this plastic heel clip towards the base of the heel counter. It's pretty par for the course with a lot of running shoes, but this is a little bit more substantial to give you some additional guidance towards the back part of your foot. But otherwise, the midsole is rather consistent, feels quite pleasant, and I do appreciate those air zoom units in the forefoot. The structure is the lighter shoe and doesn't feel as bottom heavy compared to the Infinity. I'll also say it doesn't feel as bulky. It's a little bit more nimble and just feels a little bit more compact, at least again, in my opinion. However, once you move towards the forefoot, those air units become very noticeable, and this has a much more softer and springier sensation, again, directly under your forefoot, compared to the React X foam here in the Infinity, which felt a little bit flat to me. The structure does have a wider range of runs available to it, much easier to pick up the pace, and works fine for those slower efforts as well, where the Infinity a little bit too bulky to run fast in, and I think really kind of sits firmly in that slower run category. However, if we move towards the back of the shoe, the heel section is going to be slightly firmer, although much softer compared to the Pegasus. If we compare the structure to the Pegasus, this feels noticeably softer from heel to toe. The Pegasus feels rather firm compared to the structure, but compared to the Infinity, a little bit more dense, just not as much compression compared to the React X foam in the heel. Now, if you're looking for some light stability, or if you want a bit more guidance, this is going to be a plus. You're going to have a little bit less ankle motion towards the back. You have that plastic heel clip. But if you're someone who wants a little bit more squish and comfort, that is where the Infinity kind of really shines. So if you use this as a casual shoe, I think you're really going to appreciate that additional level of squish in the heel. So kind of depends on what you're looking for. But if I had to pick one shoe or the other, I think the structure is just lighter, a little bit faster, gives you a little bit more guidance without being too intrusive, and has a much more soft and kind of energetic forefoot. Moving on to the uppers, they are completely different. On the structure, we have a more traditional classic engineered mesh, has average breathability, does fit true to size, but is a Nike shoe, so it is going to be rather narrow towards the top of the toe box. And for the Infinity, go up half a size. Again, Nike sent me a full size larger, fit fine, plenty of room at the top. I will say the toe box is a little bit pointy, but if you go up that half the full size, it shouldn't be a problem. You have a Flyknit material, which has some elasticity to it compared to the typical engineered mesh on the structure. Feels very comfortable. I think it looks cooler, but it is not actually cooler when it comes to temperature. Breathability, not ideal. You have some small holes around the toe box and through the midfoot, but it doesn't do an amazing job compared to the more traditional engineered mesh here on the Structure 25. The tongues and lacing systems are quite different as well. On the Infinity, you have this rather elastic knit-like material, and it is gusseted with strips of fabric on the lateral and medial side to keep it in place. The lacing system does not go as far down your foot, or just doesn't feel as comprehensive compared to the structure, which in my mind just provided a better lockdown. The tongue itself has more padding to it, but I did have one issue. Because it's not gusseted, the transition between the tongue material and just the side of the tongue wasn't that great, and had some kind of minor bunching, or just kind of felt like a little bit extra pressure on the sides of the tongue. So you can kind of adjust it, get it to go away, but it's one of those kind of minor annoying things where you kind of have to get it situated just right to make sure it lays perfectly flat across your foot. And then if we move to the heel counters, the padding is about the same, but the heel counter on the structure has more structure to it, as the name kind of implies, with that plastic heel clip towards the base, helping with that overall stability towards the rear of the shoe. On the Infinity, much more flexible, again, same amount of padding, pretty easy to move it around, not a whole lot of structure or plastic or anything towards the back here. And I will say, like I talked about before, I think the structure has a better lockdown and fit compared to the Infinity, with its rather elastic, rather warm upper. The outsoles have tons of rubber coverage here. The Infinity has a slightly wider forefoot, and then the structure has a Pegasus-like traction pattern. Again, tons of rubber from heel to toe, and I thought the traction worked quite well. No major kind of differences between the two, other than the forefoot, again, being slightly wider on the Infinity. So where does all of this leave us? Well, I'm going to break it down into two separate categories. One, running. This is Ryan's running reviews. And then two, walking and casual wear, since I think most people who buy this shoe are probably just going to use it for just everyday use. Now, for running, I'm going with the structure for all the reasons I stated before. It's lighter, it's more versatile, has a much softer and bouncier forefoot with the air units, and I appreciated the lockdown and fit of the upper. You do have a more noticeable arch sensation. I do think this is slightly more stable, but it's also softer compared to something like the Pegasus, and honestly, I'd probably pick this over the Pegasus since the stability mechanisms here aren't that intrusive, and the only kind of major one you truly notice, again, is that arch support, which is more noticeable compared to the Infinity. It just, for me, felt like a more versatile, easier to run in shoe compared to the Infinity, which was rather heavy. And I think this works better if you just want a recovery shoe with tons of cushion underfoot. But like we talked about before, the forefoot a little bit firmer compared to the structure. Now, if we go for walking or casual wear, you can probably guess where I'm going with this. It's going to be the Infinity. It just looks cooler. I realize you take a look at these shoes and the knit upper here, the design and just the logos and everything. This just looks like the cooler shoe. This looks like your classic Nike shoe. They didn't do too much with the styling. You also have that softer heel section, so if you're walking, you're going to be heel striking a lot more. And I think this provides a more comfortable experience on top of it just looking very dope. So it really kind of comes down to what you're looking for. Running structure, at least in my opinion, and in walking casual wear, I think the Infinity really shines through. So that concludes the review. Let me know in the comments, what do you think of these two particular options and which one would you go with? Well, I'm Ryan from Ryan's Running Reviews, and I'll catch you guys on the next one. Thanks.